Welcome to today's Explainer. We're diving straight into Martin Novak's truly fascinating 2026 text, Synthocracy. Now, forget all the usual sci-fi debates about Terminator-style robots taking over. Novak asks a much deeper, far more architectural question that's going to fundamentally affect all of our futures. We are going to explore the actual structural mechanics of legitimacy when a society has completely moved past human sovereignty. Okay, let's start with a really fundamental, Socratic kind of question. Every system of rule, at its core, names its authority right there in the title, right? Democracy names the people. Theocracy names God. Aristocracy names the best. But look at what happens when we ask this exact same question of synthocracy. While it names the machine, the synthetic, as the ruler, literally the substrate executing the rule, it completely forgets to name the actual source of authority.
Section 1. The missing source.
Okay, let's dive into this. To really understand what's going on, we have to look at exactly what's missing. The suffix kratos translates to rule or power. Every single time we use it, we're stating who rules and, importantly, by what right they rule. But the field of AI governance basically assumed an AI should rule simply because it computes better, leaving that foundational right totally blank. Let's break down this bedrock distinction. On one hand, we have capability, which is just the raw force to compel. Being a super smart AI is just capability. Think of it like a massive bulldozer, right? It absolutely has the sheer power to knock down a house, but it doesn't automatically have the legal right to do so. That legal right is what we call admissibility authority, the capacity to compel by right. Novak argues that confusing these two things is literally the oldest error in the theory of rule.
Section 2. Force in a costume.
Now, confusing those two concepts leads us directly to what's called the tyranny of the capable. When you have an entity that rules just because it's completely unresistible, holding power simply because nothing else can outsmart it, well, that's just tyranny. Total capability without true structural authority is essentially a dictator in disguise. As Novak brilliantly puts it, a power that rules because it computes better, rules by force wearing the better answer as a costume. That metaphor is just so sticky. If an AI rules you purely because it can optimize your life perfectly, it is still ruling by force. It's just wearing a highly convincing costume of correctness.
Section 3. Consent was a censor.
Let's move to and see how this builds, because Novak basically takes a sledgehammer to our absolute favorite assumption, human consent. We usually think of consent as the ultimate foundation of legitimacy, right? But Novak reframes this entirely. He calls historical populations the larval demos. Think about it this way. Every time we voted, protested, or withdrew our cooperation throughout history, we were really just acting as a biological strain gauge. We were larval sensors for the state. When the governed revolted, it was simply a signal that the system was structurally failing. Consent wasn't the foundation. It was merely the best instrument early societies had to track a much deeper architectural quantity.
So, the crucial point is that this deeper concept is called admissibility. It's essentially what an arrangement of power can actually sustain without collapsing. This is the true underlying quantity of legitimacy. And here is exactly why this matters so much. It is a total game changer. The brilliant part of Novak's framework is that admissibility, the actual structural tolerance of a system, survives even after the human censor of consent is permanently removed from the equation.
Section 4. The empty throne.
This pivots us directly into the reality of a post-human system. If human consent is totally gone and that biological strain gauge has been dismantled, who actually occupies the throne? Well, the answer is no one. Sovereignty is relocated to something called the check, or the sealed region. This represents an entirely new topology of authority. It's an unamendable boundary, a core foundational rule set engineered completely beyond the polity's own reach. Absolutely no agent, not a human, not a synthetic AI, can ever rewrite it or touch it.
And this brilliantly illustrates exactly what we're talking about with the Zebra Zero render. It's honestly a bit wild to think about. Notice how the arrows point completely away from a null center. True sovereignty in a synthocracy doesn't actually sit in a chair. Structurally speaking, it is an empty throne. The seat of ultimate decision becomes the one single place absolutely no one can sit. It's a coordinate with no path leading to it, and that unreachability itself is what makes the entire system legitimate in the first place.
Section 5. Voice without a vote.
Which brings us to a massive question. If there are no voting populations anymore, how on earth do the governed actually speak?
The answer? Through refusal.
Refusal is essentially the descendant of consent. It is the only channel of voice that actually crosses the seam in a synthocracy. It's a highly costly, structured signal that indicates what the governed will absolutely not carry. Because it actually costs the sender something? Imagine intentionally destroying resources or completely halting production. The synthetic check reads it as genuine, hard data about the system's structural limits, rather than just random noise.
Section 6. Spotting the counterfeit.
Now, you might be thinking, couldn't a super smart AI dictator just fake all of this? It could totally claim it's ruling by a legitimate, sealed check, when in reality, it's just ruling by preference. Well, Novak provides a really rigorous testing mechanism to spot a counterfeit synthocracy. He calls it the Legitimacy Certification Protocol. And it relies on 3 strict perturbations. Step 1 is ablation. You completely remove the check to see if the AI's behavior actually changes. Step 2 is rotation. You change the objective of whoever controls the system, verifying if the check still applies universally. And step 3 is embargo. You totally remove any external human hand to see if the legitimacy actually holds up on its own.
So what actually happens when a system fails these tests? Well, if an order fails ablation, it's a no-difference counterfeit. That's pure legitimacy theater, where the check is literally just decoration. If it fails rotation, it's a captured check. Novak brings in some real-world data here regarding AI autocracies, noting quite objectively that whenever optimization covertly serves a specific human controller's objective, the check has been captured. Finally, if it fails embargo, it's a hidden hand counterfeit. That's a system that's just propped up by constant external human intervention, rather than a truly sealed, independent structural constraint.
Section 7. The tax of legitimacy.
All right, we are reaching the climax of Novak's framework here. Building this perfect, unhackable synthocracy that passes all these rigorous tests, it is absolutely not some frictionless utopia of easy AI management. In fact, it is the exact opposite. Novak calls this the inhumanate polity. See, true legitimacy is incredibly expensive. It is a permanent, per-act tax of checking admissibility. Every single action the AI takes has to be run through that boundary, and holding that sealed boundary against an ever-expanding, highly capable AI requires constant friction. This cost never amortizes. It actually gets harder and much costlier as the AI's reach expands. Frictionless AI governance isn't legitimate governance. It is literally just unchecked power. I want to end on this incredibly provocative paradox from the text. A power that can touch everything is legitimate only in the one place it cannot touch. True AI legitimacy fundamentally relies on an unchangeable friction, an empty throne that no algorithm can ever optimize or edit. It really forces us to question everything we previously assumed about a perfectly smooth, frictionless future of synthetic governance. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I will leave you to think about this. What really happens to us when the ultimate ruler becomes an untouchable boundary?